presenter today. And we'll get started here in just a minute or so on the webinar. Before we do, I want to recognize that we have Mr. Steve Bailey, our Executive Director online. Steve, do you have any opening words?
Good morning, Scott. Yes, absolutely. Greetings, everyone, from a snowy Dayton, Ohio. At least it's trying to do so. We'll roll with it. It's January in the Northeast, so you live with it. I do have the pleasure this morning of introducing Scott to those of you who don't know him. Scott is a business development corporate lead at Collins Aerospace, formerly Rockwell Collins, in the Dallas suburb of Richardson, Texas. He's been on our NMA board since 2016, and in 2019, he is serving as our national treasurer. Scott has an extensive experience across many areas of public and private sector aerospace business, all the standard things that you would consider. He's an expert on DoD and FAA aviation systems. And really right now, he leads enterprise-level BD and sales activities in capturing orders with partner companies as part of Collins Aerospace Mission Systems. But to me, the fun part of any introduction is to focus a little bit on the personal side of our presenter, and luckily, I know some of that. Scott formerly was an active duty colonel and commander of several organizations in the United States Air Force. He holds a master's degree in national security strategy from the National Defense University. He has a master's in air power studies from Air University, and he has an MBA from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Kind of a theme going there. And he has a BS from Arizona State. In addition to his involvement with Collins Aerospace Leadership Association, he's active in our North Texas Council. So, without further ado, let me turn the microphone over to Scott and let him take it away.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for the kind words. I guess the theme that Steve alluded to there a little bit was that I've been through a few academic courses over the course of my career. And really one of the things I want to stress today with this presentation is continuing education. You know, we get through our degree programs, sometimes advanced degree programs, and then we wipe our brow and say, wow, great, we're done. But I would contend that we're never really completely done. That doesn't mean that it has to be drudgery. I think it can be a lot of fun. And really what today is about continuing that in terms of goal setting and further education at your own pace. So the other thing I'll emphasize for today is that this is not a story about me. What it really is meant to be is the story about you. It's meant to be a way to kind of plant a seed. And if you go away from today with the intent of exploring personal goal setting and personal success coaching, then I've done my job. So I'll state right up front, the slides are available. We'll have this recorded and on the NMA website. There is also an article that I wrote for one of the chapter newsletters. It's also available by request, if you request that. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the subject material because I really enjoy this stuff, and I think you will too. So now I've got to get the slide to go. Here we go. So my question for you to start out with, kind of food for thought is, as you look at where you are in your life right now, do you feel like you're getting better? Or do you feel like you're just kind of getting along from day to day? Do you feel like your goals are in sight, or are they kind of a distant mirage way out there somewhere? And bottom line is your life where you want it to be right now? Could there be some things in your life that you're striving for that aren't quite there yet? Success has been defined by Webster's and others as being just very simply reaching a desired outcome. And that's what I think planning for success is all about. So there are many paths to success, and I'm going to talk about one of them, but basically just to define, first of all, there's an organizational path. That's where you may have an organization or a company that you're in that teaches success principles. They may teach personal development and set you on that path. If they do, you're very lucky because I haven't run into too many corporations that do that. I was very fortunate that in the U.S. Air Force that Steve mentioned, we had some training programs for personal development, but they were very tailored to the military environment, obviously. And once I got beyond that, they weren't quite as applicable. But again, in some cases, you will get some organizational training on success planning and goal setting. Another area, another path to success might be situational. And that means you might be lucky enough to have a mentor that is willing to share with you some paths to success. In fact, maybe even lucky enough to have a supportive family or parents that sat you down occasionally and talked to you about your 5-year plan or other tips for success. And of course, once you got out of the household, that might have waned a little bit. But that is very personal and really dependent on your own situation, whether you have that type of mentoring and coaching. But the third path that I'm going to address today is what I call the personal path to success. And the idea there is that really the only completely reliable way that you can plan for your goals and your success is by taking it on yourself and making it personal. Jim Rohn addressed that, and he's one of the original success coaches, and basically said that you need to take personal responsibility, basically, if you're going to get to your goals. And keep in mind, you can't change the circumstances, you can't change the seasons or the wind, but you always have control of changing yourself. And that is the foundation, I think, of what I would call personal path to success. So this all sounds very ethereal and good, I know, from a top level, but I want to bring it down to the personal level and where it might apply to your particular life, whether it's personal or professional. And to do that, I'm going to give an example in my life that just occurred in the last year. Now, I'm a runner. I developed that habit when I was in the U.S. Air Force. I enjoy getting out on the street and getting a couple miles in. And over time, I explored the idea of maybe running some competitive races. And about a decade or so ago, I ran a couple of them and then got away from that. Well, in this last year, my youngest son decided he wanted to sign up for a half marathon. And as some of your parents may know, there are few opportunities that you have where you have intersections with something that you're passionate about, that your child, and particularly adult child, is. So you really want to jump on those when you can. And I did in this particular case. I said, okay, son, if you're going to sign up for a half marathon, I'll sign up with you. I've run a little bit, and I think I can do it.
Yeah.
So we signed up for this marathon. And I immediately realized that I was not quite ready to go do it. I needed to set up.
All the way up.
Can everybody hear me okay? I'm hearing something.
Yeah. Oh.
Everybody hearing the microphone okay? All right.
59.
So what I figured I needed to do was set up a personal path to get from where I was, which was running maybe 2 miles every few days, to being able to run 13 miles, in particular to go out there and do that with my son. So what I did was set up some goals. Now, you could do this organizationally, and in particular, I know when I was in the Air Force, there were organized runs, and there was organized coaching, but I didn't have that, like I said, because I'm beyond that career. Situationally, I could have looked around and maybe sought out a mentor. At the time, I was in the process of moving, really didn't know anybody in the neighborhood, really didn't have that available either. So I came back on the personal approach. And here's what we did, or what I did. The first thing I did was pick up a book again, and I recommend this really to all situations where you're setting up a personal goal or project, is go out and try to find the literature that you can dig into and get a little bit of a foundation for. And again, this marathon your half marathon is just kind of an analogy, and try to think in terms of your own goal setting as we talk about these things. So reading a book is a good place to start. The book's probably going to recommend equipment that you need. And certainly as I researched, I realized that I needed some better shoes. and I needed some water bottles and other equipment that half marathoners and marathoners need in order to complete successfully and safely a half marathon. Another element is following a training plan. And in this particular case, I was able to download a training plan from Runner's World magazine that conveniently had like a 3-month plan, and I had about 3 months to go until the half marathon. And it showed for each day of the week how many miles to run, and it was ramping up, towards that 13.5 miles. So that was very helpful. And then tracking progress. Most success coaches will recommend that whatever your goal is, that you keep track of it on a day-to-day basis. And I'll go into that a little more detail later on. But it's the idea of being able to show yourself that you are making progress, and in some cases also be able to make decisions on whether you're progressing quickly enough. Now, again, I'm using this marathon as an example because most people understand the idea of going out and doing something fun like that that also will benefit your health and your self-discipline. But this applies really to the entire concept of personal path to goal setting and success. And as I say, just one analogy. So let's expand that a little bit. Let's take that up to a bigger level, and what I call the marathon of life. Obviously, with your success goals and taking a look at those things that you want to accomplish over a period of time, there's going to be a lot of different categories. You're going to have professional goals, those things you want to accomplish at your company, whether you want to work your way up to CEO or whether you want to work your way into another area of the company, whatever that happens to be. Somebody pulled me aside very early in my Air Force career and said that I should always have a 5-year plan. And I think that was really good guidance. That gave me an idea of what I was going to do in my current job, what I was going to do in perhaps a next job, and then even where my long-term goals were in the company or the organization. So professional goals are obviously something you want to address. Financial goals, obviously another place, and I will emphasize this a couple times in this particular webinar. But this webinar is for all ages. If you are in your 20s, you are in the perfect position to set financial goals. And I will tell you, when I was in my 20s, that was kind of the last thing on my mind, other than paying rent. I really did not think in terms of the value of the time that I had ahead of me and the ability to compound money and those types of things. But there are some exciting things you can do with time if you're in your early phase of your career in your life. But you take a look later in life, and those of us that are approaching retirement age, and it's also important to set financial goals. They may be a little different. It may be more along the lines of restructuring your money than it is actually compounding money at that point. But financial goals can be an important thing to meditate on pretty much all the way through your life. Relationship goals for most of us are really what this all comes down to. We want to have a good job. We want to have great finances so that we can support our family and so that we can be in a position to be a quality friend and husband or wife, whatever it happens to be. Those are important things in our lives, and that's something that we can set as goals. And indeed, many of the success coaches have a relationship portion of their talk or their coaching that they emphasize. Now, it doesn't all have to be serious. There's recreational goals. Like I said, a marathon for me, I know it may sound strange to some, but it's kind of recreation. I actually enjoy the event and getting out there and meeting people. And it's important to have that balance in your life. But again, to look at the entire picture, I'd even add in for many of us, it includes spiritual goals. So it's the whole week, including the weekend, and how you want your life to progress. So let's talk again a little bit more in depth about how to get there. Well, there are people out there that have thought about this quite a bit. And that's the good news for the rest of us that are trying to learn how to pave our personal path to success. And I would submit, after doing some research on this, that the modern idea of success coaches goes back to about the beginning of the industrial age, late 19th century. And I've got a few of, along the top line here, a few of the founders, I would say, of personal success planning and success principles. In the right-hand side there, we have one of the earliest founders here, W. Clement Stone, and he's an interesting story. He was truly rags to riches. He started out in a very poor neighborhood selling newspapers, and basically came up with his own success plan that he stuck to diligently. And by the time he got to mid or late career, he was one of the wealthiest people in America at the time. But not content with just becoming a success, he wanted to share that. And he was one of the early authors that put together success principles that affected many of the other people that you see on the screen. In the middle of the screen there at the top, Norman Vincent Peale, the author of The Power of Positive Thinking, which many of us have heard about if we haven't read it. And then on the left-hand side, Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, one of the early minds that wrote books on financial goal setting and planning. So you have these founders kind of across the top, and they have inspired newer generations of success coaches like we have along the bottom. I'll go right to left. Og Mandino, lower right-hand side, wrote a book about the world's greatest salesman. So he has success coaching for sales. In the middle there, Jack Canfield. And Jack is really one of my favorites, and he's very general coach on overall success principles. He's a great place to start, and I'll have a little bit more to say about him in a minute. Probably one of the most publicized success coaches, though, in the lower left-hand corner there is Tony Robbins. He is very dynamic. He is more along the lines of what I'd call transformational success coaching, holistic success coaching, and is very active in the seminar circuit and that kind of thing. So you've probably seen him somewhere in the news. Now, this is just a sampling. I think these are important people on the screen, but I'm going to mention a few other names later on. So what do you think of this? Well, the idea is there is no one good coach to go to. And what I recommend for you, if you're starting on a program of personal success, is to go at it at various different angles, depending on your situation. A good person to start with, like I say, is Jack Canfield there in the lower center, because he's very general. He starts out with a list of success principles that are applicable to really all of these areas. But you will find that all of these people respect their others that are in this business, and they'll cross-reference quite a bit. And he will talk about all the other people on this screen and some others that I will mention here as we go along. But I would recommend, again, kind of touching all these different angles. One thing that implies that I wanted to recommend as we go through this today is a pretty good reading program. So again, if you stopped reading in your last school program, might be time to pick up a book again. And I recommend that in a lot of various forms, but we'll get to that in just a minute. So you take all of this great knowledge on success, and like I say, there's particular brands. So let me mention a few more. We're going to dig down just a little deeper on these so that you've got a really good idea of where you can go on areas that interest you. So David Allen is an expert on task management. And I'm going to have a whole slide on him here in a minute, so I won't go really deep on that. But for instance, if your inbox is like mine looks a lot of the time, that you've got thousands of emails, that type of thing, this is the guy to go to and read about to put together a personal system for managing your tasks and your emails. And I will tell you that he has taken me to the mythical inbox zero, and I'll explain how that happens here in just a minute. Prioritization, putting things in order as far as your goals, which are your most important goals. Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits, I think most people have heard about, but there's others like Brian Tracy that's very good with that. Darren Hardy, one of the first authors that I read, a exploring a personal path is incremental actions, what he calls the compound effect. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail. Jack Canfield, like I mentioned, goal setting. John Maxwell, really one of my favorites. I'm not going to talk about him in depth today, but John Maxwell is really a personal leadership type of mentor. He was actually at our NMA convention a couple of years ago. We had the great honor of having him there and talk to us and had a book signing. But he's very, very inspirational, a former pastor, so he has a larger kind of a spiritual aspect to his talks, but very good on personal leadership and goal setting. I mentioned there's several financial ones. T. Harv Eker writes a series called The Millionaire Mind. Napoleon Hill, David Bach. I'm actually reading a David Bach book right now. There's a classic called Start Late and Finish Rich, which kind of implies how old I think I am. So I'm not starting that late, but it's a good book, and it is food for thought on how to set financial goals. And then, like I mentioned, Tony Robbins and Zig Ziglar. So let's dig down a little bit on each of these. And again, this isn't meant to talk about necessarily how I have put my path together. This is how to imply how you can put together your path to personal success and personal development. So take each of these as an example. Some of these may be more important to you than others. So like I said, if you have an email inbox that is burying you and it's a particular issue for you, I would recommend the first person you go to is David Allen. David Allen has an approach that's just simply called getting things done. It's known within the business as GTD. And his thesis is that most of us go around knowing that we have a bunch of things to do in the back of our head, our subconscious. We know, for instance, that we've got a big paper inbox that you can't see out on the video right now. It's on my desk. That we have an email inbox that's just like off the charts. That we may have a project sitting over on a shelf kind of looking at us, daring us to take it on. And all these things are kind of floating around the back of our head. So his system is to take these things, categorize them, and kind of put a finger on them, get in touch with them, and organize them in such a way that you know that you're going to address all of them, you're not going to forget them. And that takes a lot of the stress level down. Hence the subtext on his book here on the screen, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity. And he has a wonderful system for doing that. I won't go into the details of that. I will tell you that he has even gone as far as appendixes to his book that address how to do that in Gmail, with the Gmail suite, using Gmail tasks and other functions that are available. He has an Outlook version to how you can set up folders in Outlook to use his system. So highly recommend GTD as a place to start for getting organized. I mentioned Darren Hardy and the compound effect. I actually read his book via audiobook. And I'll pause here to say that as part of your personal study program, I would recommend using all different venues for books. That means audiobooks for the times when you're out in the car, and I know in Dallas I'm always traveling great distances just to get to the other side of the city. Use that time to your advantage for personal development. And the Compound Effect is a particularly good audiobook. He narrates it himself, and very dynamic speaker, so it's a really enjoyable book. And again, what he does is he takes the concept that most of us are familiar with in money, where you put a little bit of money in your savings account each month, and because of interest, there is compounding that goes on. And believe it or not, $200 a month started in your 20s. If you carry that through retirement, that's like $500,000. And you just don't think of it when you're there, but it's the combination of that persistence through time and the interest. And he takes that concept and applies it to everything else in life, whether it's a weight control program or whether it's something like a marathon, whatever it happens to be. I call it incremental success planning. And those involve choices, habits, and then this whole momentum that we get, which is kind of like the compounding effect of money when we get to be successful on a personal path. Another one that I'll mention, this is one of my favorite titles, is Eat That Frog. And what that means is that Brian Tracy posits that if you start your day by eating a live frog, everything else that day will be easier. And I happen to agree with him on that. Of course, he's not being literal. What he's trying to say is that he recommends that we start with our most difficult tasks up front and attack them. And I know that's easier said than done, so he has 21 ways in this particular book of doing that and getting to that point. What I have taken away from that in my own life is what he calls his ABCDE method, and that's a way of prioritizing all of your tasks. And I kind of add that in to the GTD method that I mentioned from David Allen, and use that every day, really. As a matter of fact, I meant to show you some examples on all of this, so let me pause and do that. I mentioned that Darren Hardy, that we just talked about, was into tracking things, and I actually have I don't know if you see this, and I know you can't read it, but he has a printable tracking sheet from his website that's downloadable for free, and I use this every week to track several of my goals, and it's very motivational. Some cases it's depressing, so that's motivational. You know, I haven't quite met my goal in a week, but I have on here, I have weight tracking, I have sleep tracking since I'm not good at doing sleep. I have some actions for work. I have some other goals that I have for community participation, those types of things, and I'm tracking that each week because of Darren Hardy, basically. I mentioned that for GTD, I use that for my inbox, and then for Brian Tracy for prioritization. So I'm taking a little bit from each of these authors, from each of these success coaches, and working it into my life and what works best for me, as you can do for yourself. Jack Canfield, again, one of the best generalists. Now, you may know him from the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. He was extremely successful there. He went off to do chicken soup for nurses and chicken soup for first responders and all sorts of versions of that book, and then went worldwide with that. And he tells the story of that particular literary success in his seminars. But what he's done, kind of like W. Clement Stone, is he's giving back now. He's learned a lot by being very successful in his business life. And now he gives seminars on those success principles. Now, I'm going to give you a secret here. As you read many of these authors, you will find some similarities. A lot of the success principles are very much the same because there are some just timeless principles that all these success coaches subscribe to. What they'll do, though, in each case is they'll give it a slightly different spin or a different angle for the area that they concentrate on, whether it's finances or relationships or whatever it happens to be. I think that's a good thing. I think that shows that the principles they're teaching are timeless. And for me, I need to see something probably at least 3 times before it sticks anyway. So again, Jack is a great place to start for that. So good, my wife and I decided this last year to attend a seminar. And it happened that it was in a town where my adult children were, so it worked out as kind of a win-win. But we took an entire 1-week seminar, 8 hours a day, with Jack Canfield on his success principles. And it involved a presentation by Jack on a subject. Then we would split up into groups and do workshops and do goal planning and challenging each other on our view of our goals in our life and those type of things. We even got to have some hugging sessions, so some interesting, challenging things for each of us as far as expanding our interaction with other people and also our goal setting. And it was more than worth the investment of time and money that it took to do this seminar for each of us. But for most of you, if you have an analogy to that, it might be a company offsite. You may have been to a company offsite where you went away from your corporate area to a hotel, conference center, and you were required to wear jeans. and required to use first names, and you did some touchy-feely stuff kind of a thing. Well, these seminars are kind of like that, but the good part of that is that it causes you to think. It causes you to stop and meditate and really think deeply about where you want to go next. And if all we do is going from day to day at our job, most of us don't leave time for that. So that's why I would say consider not only Jack, but also consider going to some of these seminars. And they don't have to be 1 week. In a lot of cases, in fact, the first seminar I went to for Jack Canfield was a one-day seminar in Dallas, and compressed, obviously, but it got me interested enough that I signed up for the 1 week seminar. So I would look for those in the major cities. Almost all the people I've mentioned have a touring schedule, and they will give at least a one-day seminar, if not a webinar. So I recommend that as another way to keep it dynamic and to dig into some of these success principles. As I said, my goal for today is to have you develop your own personal path to success. Again, professionally, personally, really throughout all of your life goals. So to do that, I'm going to give you kind of my compressed 4 or 5 things that I would recommend that you start out with. So first of all, if you haven't gotten the message on book programs, I'll start with that. I recommend picking a book and reading it. This might be a little scary. Let me see if I can find it here in my list of things. I actually have this is a very small type, but this is my book list. And I actually have queued up the books that I want to read in the future. And at any given time, I will have 4 or 5 books that are on the plate. And the reason I do 4 or 5 books is they're in different formats. I always have at least one audio book that's on my plate. And that way, when I get in the car, I know that I can cue that up and listen to that audio book. I almost always have a digital book that I can pull out of my iPad when I'm on the airliner and use that time effectively. And then I almost always have a hard copy book to read in bed before sleep, because the experts will say that the digital devices don't let you wind down. They recommend that you use hard copy books in that wind down phase before sleep. And as I mentioned before, that's one of my challenges and goals is the sleep part. So I'd say pick a book and read it. Really, any of these books are great, but what you're going to get from that first book that you read is you're going to get the whole feeling of what is it about to put some emphasis on my plan, and what is it about to set goals, and not only set goals, to realize that I can reach them. I mean, that's an important realization, and all of these success coaches get that across at some point, that most of us are our own worst enemies, that we need to think big and think positive, and things will happen. That's one of the central to Jack Canfield's law of attraction, is that if you are thinking positively, positive things will happen for you. So start with a book and read it, and then see where you might want to branch off from there. The second thing I'd recommend is set aside time for personal development. And like I say, in the busy lives we have with the information overload, there's a tendency to not do that, to not have any meditation time. What I do is I set an actual hour in my schedule each week that I stop everything and put the phone off the hook for an hour, figuratively anyway, and meditate on where I want to go next. It may be reshuffling my book list. It may be planning for a seminar. It may be planning for a weekend where my wife and I are going to talk about our goals for the next year. Those types of things. But you need to set aside a little space of time in between everything else to meditate on personal development. As I implied, my wife and I do a lot of discussions on this, and I would say get your partner involved, whether that's a live-in partner or if not, a good friend. Some of you may have heard of the concept of accountability partners. That is a very strong concept. The idea that you have somebody out there that's keeping you accountable for your goal setting, whether that is getting to the gym and working out, or whether that's going running, or whether that's your meal program, whatever it happens to be, it really helps to have somebody out there that can keep you on track and encourage you. In terms of goal setting and planning, I give you at least 3 ways it helps. One is the encouragement. The second one is that you may actually be able to make mutual goals with whoever that partner is. If it's your wife or husband, my wife and I have found a great benefit to being able to sit down and talk about our mutual goals. How much time do we plan to spend with our children this next year? When do we want to go on a cruise, and when is that? Those, the fun things. And how are we going to get there? How are we going to save the money for those things? How are we going to budget the time? And then bigger life goals. How do we want to contribute to our family? How do we want to contribute to our community? And how are we going to get there? So my wife and I really enjoy that and get a lot out of that type of thing. In fact, we do schedule, I think for 2019, we decided we're going to have at least a couple of off-site weekends where we're just going to devote the weekend to a cup of coffee and a Jack Canfield workbook and going through where we want to go next. So I think that's very powerful. The third thing I would say is that it's good to bounce ideas off of other people. And in the Canfield seminar, they recommended having these groups of people with common interests that would discuss through their goals and get encouragement, but also kind of narrow down, tweak up, their goal setting. And that is sometimes best done by bouncing it off of other people. So a real benefit to having some sort of partner involved in your personal path. Next thing I'd say is track your progress. Just like I mentioned, I think there's a big benefit to that. Not only do you get the good feeling when you're making progress, but you also can see areas that maybe you're not making the progress you want, and you can make corrections at that point. So really a lot of good things to it. I try not to get too over the top on it. Like I said, I track my sleep. I've gotten a general awareness of how my sleep works, and I've learned from that. But I try not to obsess over the exact minutes and hours each night. So the idea is what you can get out of that tracking, and I think there is a lot to be had from that in various areas that you can track. And then finally, I'd say, like I mentioned before, consider attending a workshop, whether it is a one-day workshop in your town, or whether you put aside some time to actually spend a week. A week sounds extravagant, particularly with most of our schedules, but if it's going to make a difference in your life, and I think it will, then it can be really worth that investment. A subject I wanted to address, and I'm not sure where to address it, but I'll do it here, and I'll put it kind of under be bold, is again, the idea of where you are in your life and how applicable this is. And again, my assertion is that personal development goal planning is applicable across the entire spectrum. I think that if you are in the beginning of your career, that the idea of stopping and planning carefully what your path is and being bold and taking the first step can literally change your life. There are a lot of stories about people that suddenly took a pause. In some cases, it was an involuntary pause, early in their life, caused them to meditate on where they really wanted to go and what they really wanted to be and what they really wanted to contribute. And it made all the difference. It changed their outcome completely from where they were heading at that time. So early in life, absolutely, I think a critical investment. Later in life, still really important in different ways. It may not completely change the path of your life, but it may make your life much more enjoyable and much more effective. And I know that I am continuing, even at my age, to do that, because I know there's still things I want to accomplish. There's still people that I want to support and affect, and it's making a difference for me in my life. The final issue about being bold, though, is one of my favorite quotes from the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu is that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. So like any personal program, you need to make that first step. And it doesn't have to be a big one. You know, it could be just going out and buying the Jack Canfield book on Amazon. That's your first step. Okay, then you've got to actually open it up at some point. That's the second step. If your goal is, like I said, use an example of the half marathon. You know, the first step was going out and buying the shoes. Okay, that's done. Second step is maybe putting a time on the calendar that I'm going to go run. And I found that one of the best ways for me to go running is to put on my running clothes. That sounds kind of stupid, but you know, once you put the running clothes on, you feel silly if you don't go run. So it's those incremental things that you do to get you along your way, and after a while, you will develop a momentum. So I put a fun picture in here. This is actually the at the finish line of the half marathon with my son. It demonstrates a few things about personal goal setting. One is how enjoyable it can be when you set goals, and you set particularly goals that involve supporting people in your family and having family time and meaningful time. It also represents the spectrum of age. You know, I think my son got a whole lot out of it. His time was shorter than mine, I'll admit, but we both got a lot out of that race at different ends of the age spectrum. So bottom line, 3 get off the stage bullets, and then we'll do a Q&A here, is I think that you can get better at any age. I think it's exciting to see your goals achieved. And again, there's a lot of different paths to success, but probably the most reliable one is the personal path, because it's using your best resource, which is you. So that concludes my portion of the talk. We've got a good 15 or 20 minutes, which we don't have to use all of, for Q&A, but I'd open it up to either the chat room or anybody that wants to come onto the audio here for any questions.
Okay, Scott, this is Steve. Thank you. We have we don't have anything in the chat room, so Sue's opening up the mic so people can step forward or use their phones and chime in, and we'll see what your questions are and what Scott replies.
This is Avis.
Hi, Avis.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I love the slide I'm looking at right now that says get better at any age. Because if you stay around long enough, you're going to get bumps in the road.
Avis always.
Be flexible enough to go back and reassess your goals. And don't be alarmed if they change, because they might. So I really like that. I really like that one. Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Avis. Other questions?
What are you reading now?
Oh, somebody's phoning in.
Nope. Now, don't be shy, people. I know you got some questions. A reminder, if a microphone is open on your end, I'll ask everyone to kind of keep the side conversations low so we're not picking them up, which we are. So who has a question for Scott or a comment?
There's one that came in the chat room from
here we go.
Years, and it says,
oh, go ahead, Sue.
Okay. Hi, Scott. Chapter 555 in New Orleans here, and we're wondering if you have any female authors or motivational speakers you would recommend.
Okay, that's a great question. And I kind of realized as I was going across the slides that I probably need to reshuffle that a little bit. I'll just be frank with you and say that the authors that I have been involved in so far have pretty much been male, and I'm looking around to see if I have any others here. Now, there were a couple of folks in Canfield organization that, amongst their team, there were some women that gave presentations, were authors, but they were not Jack. They were kind of a subset, and they were doing different areas. So I'll tell you what, I don't have any books right here immediately that I could mention. I do know that there are. some female authors, we've had some actually at the NMA conferences. I know that were extremely effective. We have not seen a lot of them on tours and doing the real high profile, which is maybe something that we should hope to see. And I'd certainly challenge anybody who wants to go do that to go do that. But I guess I'll say I don't have a name right now. I will get back to you though. Let me do a little more research on who I could recommend.
Well, Scott, I'm trying to help you out. I went to Google real fast, and aside from Oprah Winfrey and all the others that we would expect, I appreciate you taking on that challenge. We'll make sure we get that information out to everybody.
Scott?
I do have someone did to this topic. Someone responded. I recommend Mary Ann Williamson. And the question, another one was Kim Kiyosaki, Kiyosaki, hello, Kiyosaki, and says she is Robert Kiyosaki's wife, and she's great. And then our good friends at Lockheed Martin Oldsmar, which is in the Tampa, St. Petersburg area, they wanted to know, what book are you currently working on?
Okay, before I get to that, I was drawing a blank, but I do have a female name for you, and I'm going to put it on my slide for future reference. But it's Marie Kondo, and Marie Kondo does a book about the art of tidying up, and it is awesome. And just like some of these other books, I have used Marie Kondo's book actually to organize my closet and my house, and to get rid of all the boxes I had in my office and that kind of thing. And she is becoming so popular with her particular brand of success that she now has, I think, a YouTube show that I recommend to you. But so Marie Kondo is one great example. And since you brought it up, I think I put her on a slide as well. Thank you. So the other question there beyond that again, Steve, was?
Yes. What book are you currently working on?
What book am I currently working on? Okay, so I'm gonna grab my list to make sure I've got the exact answer here. Right now, I'm reading a John Maxwell book called No Limits. It's his latest book, and the subtext is blowing the caps off of your capacity. And just a little different angle on personal leadership. So that's one book I'm reading. And I'm going to mention a few here just to kind of give you a flavor. Another one I'm reading that I think I mentioned was Start Late, Finish Rich by David Bach. And his idea is that at any point in your life, you can make financial decisions that will really benefit you if you're smart about it. And I have I'm well down a path that way, but he has a lot of great reminders of things to look for. Another thing I'm doing is I'm reading a book called The Adult ADD Solution. So once you get into this system of reading books, you realize that the books are a tool to get you smarter quickly on something that you can use. And in my case, one of my adult children has adult ADD. And actually had ADD as a child, and it has always been a challenge for him, and he is going through a challenging time in his life right now. So I decided I'm going to read a book on adult ADD so that I can get as smart as I can on what it is I can help him out with. So that one is my audio book that I've been listening to going across the Metroplex. And then I'm still finishing up Marie Kondo's book on tidying up, so that is on my list as well. So there's some of my current books on my plate.
Well, I guess you've hit the big time when there are memes about you appearing on Facebook, and I've seen several. Not you, but several with regard to Marie.
Yes.
People, this is what happens when I finish a chapter in her book, and I've seen people, pulling everything off their shelves and all that kind of stuff. It's really kind of funny. So you're right. It is my little bit exposure to her, seeing her on talk shows, is that it's a lot more than just physically cleaning up your act.
Yep.
So, okay, who else? Got a few more minutes here.
Hey, Steve. This is Monica out of Huntsville.
Hi, Monica.
Hi. One author that I just finished reading was Anne Barab, and she's actually out of the Dallas area, but she has some books, and they were really good. I thought very interesting.
And what approach does she take to success planning?
She talks about one of the books I just finished reading, The Sooner You Laugh, the Faster You Heal. She talks about job dissatisfaction and how to overcome some of the obstacles there and what to look for. And she's got a couple other books. I've got one other one scheduled to read, but I haven't read it yet.
Oh my God, that is such a great line. I'm writing this down. The sooner you laugh, the faster you heal.
Yes.
Oh, that's amazing.
And spell her last name for us, please.
It's B-A-R-A-B.
Okay. That will search on Amazon. Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Scott. I'm from Huntsville also. Retired military guy as yourself, wasn't active duty, but a reservist, and didn't get to the 06 level, so I can appreciate all the hard work you put in to get to that level. But interesting, I ran into a young man that just finished up Navy aviation program and finished in the top of his class recently down at Pensacola. And it's amazing how much you can learn from these 24-year-olds also. But I asked him how he did that, and he said it was all about flight planning prior to getting into the cockpit. But I just wanted to ask you about, from all of your 30-so years in the military, or somewhere around there, what you took away from the military that you thought was most significant with what you've been able to do now?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I'll take kind of two aspects to it. You know, my military experience is, as you know, with the military anyway, is a combination of the leadership elements of it and then the technical elements of it. And the military has us stay proficient really in both of those areas. You know, from a technical aspect, for me, it was flying. And there are a lot of, like I say, for undergraduate pilot training, you know, there are methods to success. What came to mind when you were talking was an old saying in the flying business about you plan the flight and fly the plan. And that is one of those things I can apply across everywhere, you know, as you mentioned. Another one that I use in aviation is always leave yourself an out. That's another good one that I try to impress upon my kids. In terms of the, you know, overall effect of my military career, you know, a lot of it was leadership. And even though I got the great privilege of being able to fly throughout the career, as it progressed, the more and more emphasis was on being in leadership roles. And I really enjoyed the leadership roles because they were not what I guess I had expected. It was not stereotypical to what I expected out of the military. And what I mean by that is there was a big emphasis in the areas I was in on what I call servant leadership. And I've brought this up before in the NMA context, but the idea that you are in that leadership position to serve the people that serve you. And if you take care of your people, they will take care of you. That's another quote from somewhere, but it really is true. And I tried to spend as much of the time as I could in doing that, while at the same time recognizing that in the military context, you need the leader to also point the way in a direction so that you're all marching in the same direction. It's funny that in some of the basic training, not just in pilot training, but in you know, basic officer training, they introduce you to several things that are really analogies for life. And one of them is marching. You know, we marched in officers training, and you learned how to march everybody in one direction, which you end up doing figuratively for the rest of your career. You also end up learning how to, get up at a particular time in the morning and go to sleep at a particular time. Like I said, I didn't learn that as well as I should have, but there were a lot of things that I took away from that experience that I've been able to apply in the corporate world as well. But the overall sense that I had coming out of the military was a sense of having a higher purpose, acting as a team, and as George Bush, I think George Bush Sr. had a great quote that one of the best uses of power is to serve others. And as you rise into positions of leadership, that the idea of humility and service to the people that you lead is probably one of the highest goals in that particular place. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. I got a couple things. First, our friends in Columbus want to know, what podcasts are you listening to, and do you have any daily rituals for success?
Oh, boy. Let's see where to start on that. I listen to podcasts while I run, typically. One of the things that we decided to do so that I could have a regular running program was to buy a treadmill. I try to get on the treadmill a few times a week, and I typically will listen to a podcast while I'm running, so that kind of is a win-win. What podcast do I listen to? To be frank with you, I tend to listen to spiritual sermons, that type of thing, because that is my time for studying that material. So it's also inspiring. It's a good time for me to kind of think through things. So I will listen to those type of presentations as podcasts. Other times, like I say, most of the secular success-oriented things that I listen to are audiobooks rather than podcasts. So in those cases, like I say, most of these popular books are now available in audiobook, and I do subscribe to Audible. I'm not making a pitch there, but Audible has a very easy interface, an app on the phone that connects to my car and just makes it all really easy. It also is a subscription service that kind of forces me into staying ahead of using my credits to buy new audiobooks, which has been a benefit for me.
Scott, in that same vein, as I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock here, somebody else writes, any books or audios you use specifically for career transition or even personal life transitions?
Yes. Without taking a lot of time to go pull them off the shelf, there are several books out there on transitioning. I can't name the authors right off the top of my head. Now, like I say, from when I'm looking ahead now, the ones I'm looking at, like I say, Start Late, Finish Rich is one. Really good book on retirement transition is I'm going to pull it now, is Retire Inspired. That's it, by Hogan, Hogan. And again, the name is Retire Inspired, and he takes a great approach at planning retirement from any phase of your life, all the way back into your 20s, if you're aware enough at that time to really start planning for retirement. But his thesis in his book is that retirement is not an age, it's a financial number. And you decide what your quality of life is that you want at retirement. You set that financial figure, and then when you reach it, no matter what your age is, that's when you retire. So a really good retirement transitional book. But the reason I had to think about this for a minute is there's a lot of different kinds of transitions. There's a book called Blue to Gray, which is about transitioning from military into corporate world, another classic book. There are books for, transitioning from one corporation to another. So there are a lot of different ways you do that. But my challenge to you would be to go back into Amazon and look for those, because they're out there.
Okay, Scott, from your good friend Matt Zellman, Matt provided some books. He said some authors he chatted with Christy, and she says Bren Brown, spelled B-R-E-N-E, Bren Brown, Marie Forleo, spelled as it sounds, and Mel Robbins, whom many of us are familiar with. So we'll pass those along.
And see, this speaks to having a partner, or partners, because this word of mouth is how you can get even more information and encouragement. So I appreciate all the input from everybody.
Well, so do I, and we're over time, and we're about on time, I guess. We still got 30-some people on here, so that is great. Scott, I want to thank you very much, and I want to say to everybody, our 2019 Professional Development Chairman has asked that I send out a survey after all of our webinars in 2019. So I've done it before. So we're going to kind of ramp that program back up. So later today, you will get a survey, a link to a survey instrument. I keep them short because long surveys totally work my last nerve. So I promise it's just 8 short questions, most of which you can kind of just click on a button and answer it and move on to the next one. We'll be doing that. Scott, you've outdone yourself. I wasn't sure what direction you were going to take with this. I think you went the right direction. And certainly I think you've shown us, I wrote a note to myself, it's more than starting each day with a high fiber breakfast. You got to really plan, or success isn't going to happen. So anybody want a last word before we excuse everyone and end the meeting? Anybody?
No, good job.
Thank you. And I'll say, well, I didn't answer the daily ritual question, but I will type it to you here as soon as we sit down. So hang in there, and I'll answer that question in just a moment.
All right. All of you folks have been great. It's so nice to have so many people on today. We love doing these webinars. It's fun, and we appreciate your participation. So since it's Thursday, let me wish everyone a great weekend.
Thank you all. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.